Welcome to Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed. Get ready to dive into the world of nonprofit leadership and sustainability, where the passion and unstoppable dedication of those making a real impact are celebrated. With your host, Jarrett Ransom, get ready to explore inspiring stories and game-changing strategies of nonprofit leaders from across the sector. In this season, we're focusing on critical management challenges that are key to the long-term success of nonprofit organizations. Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed is your go-to podcast for no-nonsense, in-depth conversations with the real-life superheroes of the nonprofit sector. Get ready to unleash your inner nerdiness and learn how to navigate and overcome the challenges that help build stronger, more sustainable organizations. Now, let's dive in and harness the collective power of our nonprofit networks to create lasting change.
Welcome back to Nonprofit Nerd Impact Unleashed. I am thrilled to welcome Ellen Owens Karcsay to the podcast today, and I am fortunate to have Ellen in my community. She's based right here in the greater Phoenix area, and she is the powerhouse behind Karcsay Consulting Group, LLC. Ellen shares about her people and process before product mindset. Now, if that's not a mouthful, I don't know what is. And she also invites you to stay curious about collaboration. With Ellen's expertise as a transformation advisor and merger and acquisition advisor, she helps organizations navigate change. And again, we're all going through that right now. She also helps organizations maximize opportunities and drive meaningful impact. I'm excited for you to hear her insights. But before we dive in, I want to give a huge shout out of gratitude to this season's sponsors. Thank you to Bloomerang and thank you to Chazen. Thank you for helping to bring these conversations of leadership and sustainability to light. Enjoy what Ellen has to share. Well, Ellen, hello. How are you?
Good, Jarrett. How are you?
I'm doing good. For all of you listening, it might sound like Ellen and I have known each other for a while. And the truth is we have. I was so very lucky, fortunate, Ellen, I've shared this with you before, so it's not new, to work with you as a consultant to consultant when I was serving as an interim CEO for an organization. You came in as a consultant, and I shared very transparently, I was a little worried who we were going to be assigned because I know a lot of the consultants, and I was just like, I wonder which one they're going to assign us. And that was the first time I believe that we had, engaged in like a working assignment together. So that was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was. It was. And gosh, that seems for ages ago.
It does. It does seem like ages ago. And we've, of course, had the benefit, the privilege of working together, more so. So for all of you listening, Ellen Owens Karcsay is here. She lives in my community, the greater Phoenix area. She is the owner of Karcsay Consulting Group, LLC. What I love about you, Ellen, is you are a strategic and transformative thinker. And LinkedIn, for all of you, if you haven't checked her out yet, it also says she's a believer that great things come from collaboration. So, Ellen, tell us a little bit about the services you offer through your consulting group.
Karcsay Consulting Group, and I think the key word there is collaboration, and that's really what we're about. We're really a collective of other consultants that believe in working together to help organizations achieve optimal outcomes. Our focus primarily is on strategic design and transformative ways of work, as well as business process optimization and strategic collaborations, which includes partnerships, mergers, acquisitions, all kinds of forms of formalized collaboration. And that's our area of focus. And you can't help these days but to talk about technology as how that enables those three things. But we are a believer in people and process before product.
People and process before product. I love that. And also on LinkedIn, it says transformation advisor and merger and acquisition advisor. So for all of you that are thinking M&A, mergers and acquisition, is that really a thing in the sector? It's a thing. And I think we're going to start seeing and hearing more of that. So that's just a little teaser, but let's dive in, Ellen, because I want to start off right out the gate asking you, what leadership and sustainability is looking like today with our current climate and our current state of affairs. What are you seeing in our sector and with the organizations you're working with?
Yeah, so leadership, I think, is really changing for a couple of different reasons. Number one, given the environment that we're in, where every day could bring something new, it's really causing leaders to have to think ahead. They're having to anticipate the possibilities, the what ifs, and start to lead their organizations in a way to be able to mitigate any risks associated with those what ifs. But I also think the positive side of that is that always presents opportunities, and I think leaders have to start looking at the opportunities that exist and saying, if this is going to be the case, then how do we transition? How do we pivot? How do we lean into those changes to be a co-disruptor, if you will, to those disruptions in our environment? The other thing that's changing leadership is the evolution of AI. You thought you were going to get away with a podcast where we didn't talk about AI. You were wrong. I read a research article in Harvard Business Review recently, and I was like, wow, this is like so basic, but so interesting to think about the way that leaders are changing the way they ask questions versus because they're starting to get used to prompting AI to start to search for answers. So they're asking things in different ways and they're being more detailed. So there's a shift in leadership in terms of how they ask for information from their teams versus a telling. So they want to get the response instead of telling them what to do, they're asking. And so there's a transition in how that communication from a leadership is starting to transform as well.
Oh, that is like, I want to say like caveman time, right? It's like we are teaching the new like civilization how to interact, how to lead their teams. Yeah, mind blown. Truly,
Yeah,
that is fascinating to me. I would love to see that article.
I'll share it.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. So leadership is a big thing. And obviously you show up as a leader too when you work with your organizations and the clients that you serve. So how would you define your leadership style, Ellen, and how you show up through these conversations?
Clients, number one, you have to be collaborative. And so as a consultant and helping to lead these organizations through change, I can't I can't afford to not be collaborative. And so not only with the clients, but also with other consultants that can bring in expertise or other perspectives. So I'm a collaborative leader, but also I am an agile leader, meaning that you have to learn how to pivot on a dime, change direction, adapt, and flex in terms of where the client needs you the most. And sometimes that's rolling up your sleeves and being a doer. Sometimes that's stepping back and letting them sit on an idea or a concept for a while and letting them come to the conclusion. So you have to learn really when to push forward and when to let off and let them figure out things for themselves. So that flexibility and collaboration are the two key things in my world.
Such sage advice, right? It's not a one size fits all. And even while you're working with one client, what they need is different depending on where you are in, in the scope of work, I would say.
Exactly. Change management is embedded into almost everything that we do. And when I
Yeah.
say change management, some people think it's just words, but there's actually a framework for that. And that's really where this comes from, is understanding that there are individual changes that are happening, but there's also organizational. And how do you balance and understand where people are at in different stages of change? And when you're working with a group, you're not going to have consistency. You're going to have a fraction of people that are just learning about the change and some who have been involved in it for since inception.
I want to say I've heard this out of your mouth. I know I've said it out of my own mouth, and I've heard it from so many other people. It's like, if you know one nonprofit, you know one nonprofit. If you know one board, board member, one board member. Like everyone has its own little nuance and its own difference, which takes me to, and you've mentioned this a lot, change, adapting to change. How have you helped nonprofits adapt to the current changing economic and social landscape? What does that look like right now for you?
Yeah, there's a few things that I'm starting to see in terms of where they need to adapt. And that is, I mean, again, it's really about having them see the opportunity for collaboration. And that collaboration comes in a variety of different forms. It can be very formal in a strategic partnership. It could be an acquisition of another organization. It could be a merger to form a brand new entity. It could be a joint venture where people invest into a new entity. But also at the very basic, we're starting to see an acknowledgement that a lot of nonprofits, maybe the same sector, maybe not, but they have a need for a shared resource. And so for the concept of a shared back office, a shared resource, where each nonprofit is not having to invest in the same capital equipment or the same even staff members being shared, or we probably all are very familiar with some of the concepts of like an accountant that's a third party consultant that comes in. That's kind of a shared resource. But why not establish these hubs of same types of smaller organizations sharing a shared resource, whether it be a person, a place, or an asset. And so this is kind of the new evolution of when we talk about strategic partnerships and collaborations. We're not talking about just M&A. We're talking about a real broad variety of formalized partnerships.
When
And
I
yeah,
hear that, and I'm all for it, I think of two things, like ego and intellectual property. So how do those two things show up when you think of collaboration? And I'm going to say such an intimate setting where maybe you are sharing, an office location, maybe you are sharing staff in particular. And then when it comes to strategic partnerships, maybe a merger acquisition, I always say every nonprofit has an origin story, and it starts with a founder. And some founders are still involved, some founders are not. Some board members are like a second founder, right? And so I could just go back to ego and intellectual property. So how do you manage those two things when it comes to like really championing collaboration?
yeah, it's complex, and you have to first of all really get to the root of what that resistance is. So really keying in on what is the point of resistance. And I will tell you, to your point about founders, um, the reality is that any entrepreneur that starts a new business, and let's be honest, nonprofits or businesses, they need to make money to sustain their mission. But any entrepreneur that starts a business typically automatically starts to think about their exit strategy. They start the business, and the next thing you're thinking about is, how do I exit this? Because they understand that that is important as part of the evolution of the company, that your company will only grow if you allow it to evolve and potentially for you to leave and let it go to somebody who has a new vision to take it forward. So that's healthy. That's important. And I think founders start to need to embrace that idea, hopefully sooner. But you and I both know there's a lot of founders out there that are way down that path. So now how do you dial it back and get into that? Well, helping them to come to terms with the idea that this is healthy evolution as a founder to turn my organization over to another entity or convert it or what have you, so that it can continue to live out its mission. So focusing in on the why. And that's usually what I get to with groups, is I get them out of the emotion of what's happening and say, why are we having this conversation? Well, what happens if we don't do this? And what's the risk? And so when they start to think about that, the risk is that it just all goes away completely, and there's no longer an organization to do that. Or in one circumstance, I was working with a professional organization, and they really wrestled with the ego around who's going to be the succeeding organization. And when I finally just called it out and said, look, if you don't do this, you risk now completely going away, going out of business, and then your profession is going to hurt as a result of it, because they won't have advocates in the space to be able to advocate for them. So that was kind of the simplistic version. But essentially, when they keyed in on the why, and it made me so happy in a meeting where somebody stopped and said, I remember the why. This is why we have to do it. So they will remember it. If you get to what it is that's really important to them and can connect the dots for them, you'll see greater success in helping things move forward. The biggest challenge a lot of times is they get brave and they're like, oh, we're going to make a move, we're going to move things forward, and then they get scared and get cold feet and go, oh, no, let's dial it back. So you see this cycle of just going in circles and going in circles. And either one of two things will happen. They'll finally move forward, or the runway will run out, and now you're out of time and the clock ticks and you don't have, your options are gone. So that's the biggest risk to organizations. And I try to get them to understand that is, while you think that's 5-6 months down the road, it will take you a good 5-6 months to even get to that point. So don't think that your runway is endless.
That's a really good perspective. And what I hear too is the importance of efficiency, operational efficiency. So talk to us about, Ellen, how you help nonprofits balance. I mean, I'm going to say with you, because you have such a tech focus, the need for operational efficiency while also investing in their technology. What does that look like?
Yeah, and it kind of ties to the previous question about, being worried about who owns what and the data and the shared knowledge. But technology is one of those areas for collaboration. And I see it. I'm going to tell you, I see hints of it. So I'm super excited that we're starting to see some pilot projects spinning up around technology where it's a shared platform. Because a lot of, you think about your donor management systems. Why can't some of these smaller organizations have a single platform donor management system where you have isolated tenants underneath a single platform where data is not cross-shared, but data could be aggregated when you're needing that for a grant? It's anonymous, but aggregated data that you can use, because data is gold, but allows organizations to not have to go out and buy their own platform. So having that, so that's one thing. The other thing that
Oh,
I
can we
see,
just stop right there? Because that is
yeah,
fascinating to me. And for someone that's in a lot of donor databases with often small to mid-sized nonprofits, without the staff and capacity to actually use all the bells and whistles of the donor database, to know, like, my first thought was, when you mentioned it, I was like, yeah, that's not going to happen, right? Because of confidentiality. But then when you think further in what you said, really like separating and having that, the anonymous sector and however it's segregated, right? So it's like, I don't know, it really makes me think about, wow, what are the opportunities there? So another mind blown moment, because I had never thought that could even be possible.
yeah. And the hard part about that is process, which we are a big believer in process. But let's face it, some of these smaller nonprofits don't have a process to begin with, let alone the technology.
No.
So if you can get them to adopt a standardized process and buy into that, and let's say, like arts organizations, they probably basically do similar types of things in terms of their organizations if they're similar in scope. So
Yeah.
adopting a process and then plugging that into a system that can enable that process will help them in a couple of different ways. Number one, they get a process designed for them
Yeah.
and helps to get them to move forward. So yeah, and I think the other piece of this in terms of when we talk about operational efficiency is when and this is usually for larger organizations that have combined, and in the for-profit sector, I saw this far too often, far too often. So if anybody out there listening thinks that the for-profit sector has this nailed, they don't. This is common. This is hard work. And I don't want anybody to think that it should be super easy and they feel like, oh gosh, this is really hard. It is. It is, no matter what size or how mature you think you are as an organization. So anyway, with that said, is don't let tool sprawl happen, where you end up having two different environments to store your documents. I see that quite often. Well, they didn't want to change to whatever the platform and vice versa. Well, guess what? You're spending twice the money. Having someone come in and do an assessment on your technology stack. So if you're paying for things that you didn't even know you had. I had a client one time and I was like, I wonder where this phone number goes. So I called it and went into dead air. And they had 2 or 3 phone numbers they were paying for monthly for years. And while it's not a big chunk of money month over month, but after it adds up and you're not even using those numbers and you're paying for it and nobody knew. That's not uncommon, but it happens. So having an audit of your technology and saying, where can we consolidate and put it into one stack? Where do we have duplication? And a lot of times it comes down to, well, we don't like that platform, so we're going to buy a separate platform. Well, sometimes those are the decisions that leaders then have to come back and say, we need to be efficient and explain the why. And so helping the employees and the teams get to understand that you need to also be adapting to a different way of work to create efficiency. So it's a balance. It's a true balance. But it's also a cybersecurity risk when you have multiple tools and different things. There's all kinds of things. I could go on forever, but that is where we're seeing a lot of inefficiencies in organizations right now, is with technology and the combinations of technology, and then no one says this is the new way of work.
Right, right. And efficiency is important for sustainability, right? And so, I'm really curious how the organizations you're working with are making decisions right now with that focus of sustainability in mind.
Yeah, a lot of them are unfortunately being forced to understand what are our other sources of revenue
Mhm.
besides federal grants or pass-through grants. And so, again, that's being anticipatory and understanding that those sources are not a guarantee. So, how do you generate other lines of revenue, earned revenue, if you're not capitalizing on your donors? I know that's your area, Jarrett. That's not my area, but definitely understanding the business model and saying, where can we save money, but also how do we make money? And I think that's an immediate response, is where do we cut? But leaders also need to balance that as, how can we generate new revenue? How can we increase our revenue streams for sustainability? And then that sustainability piece is, again, being anticipatory and understanding what trends have shown us, and they call those hard trends. What are the hard trends that we can count on, that we have seen year over year over year, and soft trends, and what can we look at in the future to say, what do we need to be doing 5, 10 years down the road? So, the days of strategic planning are, what do we need to do to fulfill our mission? And I'm being a little facetious, but the reality is that needs to be dialed up a notch. Strategic
Yeah.
planning cannot any longer be the board saying, how do we do a better job of our mission? It's more about, how do we become a disruptor? How do we anticipate what could be coming down the road? And being more of that truly strategic but anticipatory type of thinking to go into a strategic planning. So
I
I think
agree.
that's where people need to go, and that's how they're going to, honestly, it's going to have to happen that way to be sustainable.
Yeah. And as a proud disruptor myself, right? Like, I love to wave that flag because I like to say it's not negative, right? It really is what you've been saying. It's anticipating what if, what's possible, like all of these opportunities, and really looking at it from a, let's get ahead of it so that we can anticipate, you know, what's coming. So all of that, such great information. I know we could talk for much longer, but I'm going to leave us with two questions. The first one is, before we sign off, please tell us where people can learn more about you as well as your company.
First of all, website is Karcsay Group, Karcsay group.com. That's our website. And that's a good place to look and see who we're collaborating with and the types of work that we do. And then also, we are really ramping up our information on LinkedIn. We've really increased our cadence of information. We have a Think Tank Thursday for the third Thursday of every month that explores different concepts and ideas. And we invite people to do that virtually. And then once a quarter, we do it in person here in Tempe, Arizona. And so, look out for those pieces of information, because it's really about helping to educate the community. And this is nonprofit, for-profit, small, medium-sized businesses, because that's where the collaboration comes in. So yeah, look for me on LinkedIn as well, and our
I
organization
love
page.
it. And I have seen the increase of posts and all the great content that you're putting on LinkedIn. So great job. Okay, final question. Is there a takeaway, Ellen? Anything you want to leave our listeners with, or anything that you want them to know today as we wrap up the conversation?
Yeah, I would say, don't don't fear don't let the fear of the unknown around collaboration stop you from exploring it. It is healthy, and I think you should look at it as being an innovator versus something that is sometimes portrayed as negative or a stigma that we couldn't do it. It's really a healthy thing to look at these collaborative opportunities and to embrace it and lean into it for the sake of your organization and your mission.
That is fantastic. So for all of you listening, stay curious around collaboration and, consider it. You never know what might come of it. I've got to get to one of these think tanks. It sounds really exciting. I know I was registered for one. I didn't make it, so I definitely want to make it to another one. Ellen, thanks for all you're doing, and thanks for sharing your expertise with us today.
Thank you, Jarrett. You always host great opportunities for us. Thanks.